Welcome in, everyone, ready to take a deep dive with me into the world of TED Talks. Specifically, the ones that stick with you, the ones that really get people talking.
I'm excited to dig in. We've got a fascinating list of some of the most popular and impactful TED Talks to unpack.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we can uncover any sort of secret sauce, the ingredients that make these presentations so memorable.
Right, what makes them stand out from the thousands of others out there.
Totally. Okay, so looking at this list, one thing that jumps out at me right away is how many of these talks hinge on personal stories?
Oh yeah, for sure. The speaker's willingness to be vulnerable, to share their own experiences, seems to be a key ingredient.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, like think about Brené Brown's talk, The Power of Vulnerability. It's become a classic, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And, she's diving into her research on courage, shame, authenticity, all that good stuff. But
it's not just the research, right? It's the fact that she so openly shares her own struggles with vulnerability.
Yes. It creates this sense of shared humanity, makes you feel like she's right there with you.
Exactly. By opening up, she establishes this connection that goes beyond the typical speaker-audience dynamic. It makes her message about embracing vulnerability all the more powerful.
Right. And it makes you wonder, does that vulnerability make us more receptive to her message?
Right.
Like she's giving us permission to embrace our own imperfections.
Absolutely. It's like she's saying, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. I am too.
Yeah.
And that makes us more willing to listen.
So personal stories seem key, but it's not just about sharing any old story. It's got to be done well, right? Like Sir Ken Robinson in Do Schools Kill Creativity, he's a master storyteller, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Robinson's talk, it's a classic for a reason. I mean, he uses humor, he weaves in anecdotes from his own life, and he does it all to deliver this thought-provoking message about the education system.
And it's so entertaining. Like, it doesn't feel like a lecture at all.
No, not at all. It feels more like you're sitting down having a conversation with him, just chatting about these important ideas.
Totally. Okay, and speaking of captivating narratives, Chris Hadfield's What I Learned from Going Blind in Space.
Talk about a story that grabs your attention from the very beginning.
Right, I mean, going blind during a spacewalk, it doesn't get much more intense than that.
It's terrifying to even think about, and yet he manages to extract these incredibly powerful lessons from that experience about preparation, courage, resilience.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we all face challenges, and it's how we respond that defines us. So we've got vulnerability with Brown, humor with Robinson, a gripping narrative with Hadfield. Could the common thread be that personal stories just make these big ideas more relatable?
Definitely. They give it that human touch. It's not just data or abstract concepts. It's a real person sharing their experience, and that makes it much easier to connect with.
Okay, so personal stories are a big part of it, but looking at this list again, I'm also noticing a theme of action. Many of these talks leave you feeling empowered, like you could go out and make a change.
Oh yeah, totally. It's not just about sharing information, it's about inspiring action.
Yes, like lighting a fire under you to do something different.
Exactly. Simon Sinek's talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action. That's a prime example, wouldn't you say?
It's a classic, the golden circle.
Right. He argues that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Starting with your purpose, your why, that's what truly motivates and inspires people.
I feel like I hear that phrase, start with why, everywhere. But hearing Sinek explain it, it clicks.
It makes you think differently, right?
Yeah.
About how you communicate your own ideas and goals, even in everyday conversation.
Totally. Okay, so Sinek's pushing us to start with why, but he's not the only one trying to spark a movement. I'm thinking about Jamie Oliver's talk, Teach Every Child About Food.
Such a passionate plea for change. He really brought the issue of childhood obesity to the forefront, didn't he?
He did. And not just talking about it, but actually advocating for concrete actions, like healthier school lunches.
Right, and he used his platform to really make a difference, which is inspiring to see.
It is, and sometimes even seemingly small changes can have a ripple effect, Like in Nilofer Merchant's talk, got a meeting, take a walk.
Right, simple but effective. Get up, move your body, have a walking meeting.
Exactly, and it's something we can all do right here, right now. So is that maybe another key ingredient? That these memorable TED Talks leave us with this sense that we can actually make a change no matter how big or small.
I think you're onto something. It's not just about listening passively, it's about feeling empowered to do something differently.
Okay, so we've got vulnerability, humor, suspense and storytelling, and a call to action. But there's something else I'm noticing in many of these talks.
What's that?
It's this willingness to challenge the status quo, to make us rethink our assumptions about the world.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like they're pushing us outside our comfort zones, making us question things we might have taken for granted.
Exactly. Like Dan Gilbert's talk, The Surprising Science of Happiness. It completely blew my mind.
What was it about that talk that resonated with you so much?
Well, he challenges this idea that our happiness is directly tied to our circumstances. The whole, if only I had this, then I'd be happy kind of thinking.
Oh yeah, that's a common one.
Right. But Gilbert argues that our brains brains are actually capable of creating happiness, even when things don't go according to plan.
It's this idea of synthetic happiness. It's fascinating. He uses this metaphor of our brains being like happiness chefs. Even when life throws us rotten ingredients, we can still whip up something delicious.
I love that, and he backs it up with science, which makes it even more compelling. So, do you think this synthetic happiness, this adaptability, is something we can cultivate, or are we just wired that way?
That's a great question. I think Gilbert's research suggests that we have a lot more control over our happiness than we might realize.
It's almost like he's giving us permission to stop worrying so much about external factors and focus more on building our own inner resilience. And it makes me think of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's talk, The Danger of a Single Story. It's all about challenging our assumptions and biases.
Right, the single story trap.
Yeah.
We tend to reduce complex individuals and cultures to just one narrative, which can be incredibly limiting.
Exactly, and she challenges us to seek out multiple perspectives, to embrace the complexity of the world.
Absolutely, because the world is full of these rich, diverse stories, and we need to engage with them all to really understand each other.
And speaking of shaking things up, Elizabeth Gilbert's Your Elusive Creative Genius offers such of a refreshing take on creativity. She encourages us to detach our self-worth from our creative output.
Oh, I love that talk. She presents this idea of genius as this external force, rather than something that we possess or lack. It takes so much pressure off, doesn't it?
It does. Like, creativity becomes more of a playful exploration, less about agonizing over whether we're good enough. So it seems like a common theme here is that these memorable TED Talks invite us to think differently, to challenge our assumptions, and step outside our comfort zones.
Absolutely. It's about expanding our minds, opening ourselves up to new possibilities.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in this treasure trove of TED Talks. I can't wait to see what other insights we uncover as we continue our deep dive.
Ready for round 2 of our TED Talk deep dive.
Oh yeah, I'm excited to keep going. We've already uncovered some fascinating patterns, haven't we?
We have. But there's so much more to explore. One thing I've been noticing is how many of these memorable talks incorporate data and research into their narratives.
Oh, for sure. It's not just about telling compelling stories, it's about backing those stories up with solid evidence.
Right. It adds a layer of credibility. Makes you think, okay, this isn't just someone's opinion, there's actual science behind it.
Exactly. It's like, don't just take my word for it, folks. Look at the facts. I'm thinking about Han Rosling's The Best Stats You've Ever Seen. Have you seen that one?
Oh, Rosling. He was a master at making data come alive, wasn't he?
He was, using engaging visuals, a playful delivery. It's amazing how he could take dry statistics and turn them into compelling stories.
I know. It's like watching a magic show. And he used those data visualizations to debunk so many common myths about global health and development.
I remember watching his talks and being genuinely surprised by some of the trends he revealed. Like, it really challenged my assumptions about the world.
Yeah, it makes you realize how important it is to look beyond the headlines and dig into the actual data.
Absolutely. It makes me wonder, though, is there something inherently more impactful about visualizing data compared to just hearing numbers, you know?
Oh, I think so, definitely. Visuals just make information more accessible and engaging. It's easier to grasp patterns and trends when you can actually see them laid out, right?
Right. It's like the difference between reading a recipe and watching a cooking show. The visual element just adds a whole other dimension.
Exactly. Okay, and speaking of powerful visuals, Matt Walker's talk, Sleep is Your Superpower. That one really stuck with me.
Oh yeah. Walker makes such a compelling case for the importance of sleep. And he doesn't just tell you, he shows you, brain scans, charts, even microscopic images.
I know. He lays out all the scientific evidence about how sleep deprivation affects our brains and bodies. It's hard to ignore after watching that talk.
It's a wake-up call, for sure. So we've got Rosling, the data magician, and Walker painting these vivid pictures of our sleep-deprived brains. It seems like they both understand that data is most impactful when it's not just presented, but truly brought to life.
Storytelling with data, that's the key, isn't it? You can have the most compelling research in the world, but if you can't communicate it in a way that engages people, it won't have the same impact.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about data and research, but I think it's also worth exploring another recurring theme in these memorable talks, the focus on personal growth and transformation.
Absolutely. These talks often offer practical insights and tools for living a more fulfilling life, don't they?
Yes. They inspire us to become better versions of ourselves, to break bad habits, cultivate new skills, that sort of thing.
Judson Brewer's talk, A Simple Way to Break a Bad Habit, comes to mind. He presents this mindfulness-based approach to understanding and overcoming negative habits.
Oh, I loved that talk. He explains how our brains are wired to form habits and how mindfulness can help us break free from those patterns. Do you think mindfulness is something that anyone can learn?
Oh, absolutely. Brewer offers these really practical strategies for identifying triggers, becoming more aware of our habits, and ultimately changing our behavior.
It's like he's giving us a toolkit for rewiring our brains, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of personal transformation, I was really struck by Rita Carter's talk, Why Reading Matters.
Oh, yes, Carter. She makes such a compelling case for the power of reading, doesn't she?
She does. She argues that even dedicating just 30 minutes a day to reading can have this transformative effect on our lives, improving our focus, expanding our vocabulary, boosting empathy.
She really highlights the cognitive and emotional benefits, doesn't she? I love how she reframes reading as this enriching experience rather than a chore.
Right. What if we thought of it more like a daily mental workout? Something that strengthens our minds, just like exercise strengthens our bodies.
That's a great way to look at it. So, we've got Brewer helping us break bad habits, and Carter encouraging us to unlock the power of reading. It seems like these talks are reminding us that personal growth is an ongoing journey.
It is, and it's often about making those small, consistent choices that add up over time. Like, we don't have to overhaul our entire lives overnight. It's about taking those little steps day by day.
Small changes, big impact.
Yeah.
That's the idea, right?
Exactly. Okay, but sometimes those small changes require a bit of tough love, a push to step outside our comfort zones. I'm thinking of Jocko Willink's extreme ownership.
Oh, Willink's talk is definitely a call to action. As a former Navy SEAL, he brings this unique perspective on leadership and accountability.
Right. He encourages us to take full responsibility for our actions, no excuses, no blaming others, the whole own your choices kind of thing.
Extreme ownership, as he calls it. It's about recognizing that we have more agency than we often give ourselves credit for.
It's a powerful message, for sure. But it can also be a bit intimidating, don't you think? Like, is that level of ownership even realistic for everyone?
I think it's more about the mindset than a rigid set of rules, It's about acknowledging that we have the power to shape our own lives, even if it's not always easy.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about striving to be accountable.
Yeah, I like that. And speaking of taking control of our well-being, Vincent Lam's talk, The Power of Fitness, really highlights how prioritizing our physical health can transform our lives.
Oh, absolutely. Lam reminds us that fitness isn't just about aesthetics, it's about overall health and well-being.
Right. He busts those myths about not having enough time to exercise and emphasizes how even small amounts of movement can make a huge difference.
It's about finding activities we enjoy and incorporating them into our daily routines. Making movement a habit, not a chore. So we've got Brewer guiding us towards mindfulness, Carter inspiring us to read, Willink urging us to take ownership, and Lam emphasizing the power of movement. It seems like there's a common thread here. Personal transformation often starts with those small, consistent choices.
Exactly, and it's an ongoing journey, not a destination.
There's always room for improvement, always something new to learn, always another level to unlock. And I can't wait to see what other empowering ideas these TED Talks have in store for us as we wrap up our deep dive. We're back for the final stretch of our TED Talk exploration, and I gotta say, I'm really struck by how many of these talks challenge conventional thinking. They really push us to question our assumptions about the world.
It's true. TED Talks have this knack for introducing new perspectives, making you re-examine things you might have taken for granted.
Right. It's like they're nudging us outside our comfort zone, saying, hey, what if things aren't always as they seem? One talk that really did that for me was Dan Gilbert's The Surprising Science of Happiness.
Oh, Gilbert's talk is a classic. What was it about that one that resonated with you?
Well, he challenges this idea that our happiness is directly tied to our circumstances, The whole, if only I had this, then I'd be happy trap.
Oh yeah, I think we all fall into that trap sometimes.
Totally. But Gilbert presents this idea that our brains can actually create happiness even when things don't go according to plan. It's called synthetic happiness.
It's fascinating, isn't it? He uses this metaphor of our brains being like happiness chefs. Like, even when life throws us rotten ingredients, we can still whip up something delicious.
I love that analogy, and he backs it all up with scientific research, which makes it even more compelling. So, do you think that this synthetic happiness, this ability to adapt, is something we can cultivate, or are we just wired that way?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think Gilbert's research suggests that we have more control over our happiness than we often realize.
It's almost like he's giving us permission to worry less about controlling our circumstances and focus more on building our inner resilience.
Exactly. It's about shifting our mindset.
And that makes me think of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's talk, The Danger of a Single Story, which is all about the importance of perspective.
Adichie's talk is so powerful. She warned us about the dangers of reducing people or cultures to a single narrative.
Right, the single story trap. It's so easy to fall into, especially in a world that often oversimplifies complex issues.
It is, and she encourages us to seek out multiple perspectives, to challenge our own biases, to really embrace the complexity of the world.
It's a reminder that everyone has a story, and those stories shape who they are. Okay, and speaking of stories, I have to mention Elizabeth Gilbert's Your Elusive Creative Genius. It completely changed the way I think about creativity.
Oh, I love that talk. What was it about Gilbert's message that resonated with you?
Well, she encourages us to separate our sense of self-worth from our creative output. Like, instead of agonizing over whether we're good enough, we should just focus on the joy of creating.
She presents this idea of genius as this external force that we can tap into rather than something we possess or lack, right?
Exactly. It makes creativity feel less intimidating, more accessible. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of TED Talks, what's your big takeaway? What makes these presentations so enduring?
I think it's a combination of things. Powerful ideas, compelling storytelling, and a genuine desire to connect with the audience. These speakers aren't just delivering information, they're sharing their passion, their insights, their vulnerabilities.
And they're doing it in a way that's both thought-provoking and entertaining.
Absolutely. TED Talks have this unique ability to make you think, feel, and question. They challenge you to grow and expand your perspective.
And they leave you feeling inspired, like you can actually make a difference in the world.
Exactly. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep letting those TED Talks spark your curiosity and ignite your passions.
It's been an incredible journey, and I'm so grateful to have shared it with you. Thanks for joining us.